You know, guys, in the West, we're taught to go hard and train hard. And if your exercise isn't hard or intense, it's not effective. In traditional Chinese medicine, that's not exactly the case. That type of mentality actually shortens your lifespan. So, high intensity exercise could be good. It is good. It's great. I'm guilty of constantly going intense myself, but then my body reminds me that's not always the right thing to do. In traditional Chinese medicine, you're born with a certain amount of Jing, right? Energy that you have in your constitution. And you have a certain amount and it's finite. And use it wisely as you continue to exercise and push yourself hard. You're actually draining your energy according to traditional Chinese medicine. Exercise should move your chi, balance your chi. It shouldn't always deplete it. You shouldn't always feel dead after exercise in traditional Chinese medicine. And I will admit there is an addicting nature to super intense exercise. I am guilty of it myself. But we know from Western medicine that overtraining is a real thing, right? Heart rate variability is something that suffers from overtraining. Cortisol levels stay increased. Tissue breakdown happens. You can't recover. Tendonitis, inflammation across joints. These are things you see with overtraining. And even if you're eating properly, you can still overtrain. Again, guilty of it myself. So this certainly isn't a judgment. It's a conversation about staying focused in the balance of things. In the Massoud method, we're using traditional Chinese medicine, chiropractic, functional medicine, nutrition, and sports medicine, basically to find the right balance for our activities. And I've certainly been at that point where I've been overtraining, and I've been very humbled by my desire to push through it and the reminder that you can't. So, as the traditional Chinese medicine saying goes, you have a certain amount of heartbeats, use them wisely. Does that mean never exercise intensely? Of course not. I certainly couldn't settle for that myself. But does every exercise has to have you redlining? No, of course not. And there's consequences to constantly redlining yourself. Like I just talked about, the overtraining that occurs, the cortisol levels being stuck too high. Well, ultimately, what you're doing, and especially from a Chinese medicine perspective, is you're keeping yourself in a sympathetic state. You're constantly pushing. You can push yourself so hard that you can't come down, where sleep starts to suffer. That's a major consequence of overtraining is sleep disturbances, not being able to sleep, waking up sore, right? Constant joint muscle pain, as I was mentioning earlier. These are real signs of overtraining. And to get to that point, you do have to push yourself. And as you're pushing yourself along the way, it feels really good. At least I think so. And my patients think so. I have a very active patient base, and resting for them is very hard. And I find it puzzling, or more so intriguing, the addictive nature of heavy exercise. It's very hard to walk away from. Things that really stimulate our sympathetic nervous system tend to really be pretty addicting. And the things that put us into a calm, restful state, maybe it's our modern lifestyle, maybe it's because I'm in the Northeast tri-state area, or maybe it's just my nature and the nature of people who are attracted to my office. It seems a lot of people really push that envelope and go hard. Even when they're injured, I have patients still pushing very hard, and telling someone that they need to rest when they're injured doesn't always go over well. I certainly sympathize. I've been there and I've done that. And it doesn't usually work out great if you don't give your body the time it needs to heal. So, if your sleep is disrupted, if you're constantly dealing with joint pain, inflammation, and you're like, I'm working out hard, I go hard, I do this, I do that. Like, as someone who loves to strength train, if it's not intense, I have a mindset that it's not effective either. But that's not the case, right? We know, like, zone 2 cardio is very effective. You're not sprinting constantly, right? Very good for cardiovascular health. Stretching, restorative work, yoga, right? Yin yoga, where you're kind of opening your tendons, relaxing, getting the circulation, getting the flow going. These are things to be mindful of, right? So traditional Chinese medicine has its philosophies locked in balance and in longevity. Burnout, high intensity model of the West is good for my business. It's addicting, I guess, to some extent, when you're in that constant feeding your sympathetic nervous system stimulants, right? People love it. But that's not where we need to stay. That doesn't prolong life. That doesn't promote longevity. So I find this a very interesting concept. If you guys have any feedback yourself, if anyone's been overtraining and you could share your experience, I'd love to hear about it. I walk a tightrope between that need to constantly push myself real hard and then my body telling me, knock it off. And then it's like, okay, I'm humbled, I'm doing yoga, I'm restoring, I'm hydrating, I'm resting, There's intense forms of yoga too. So just saying you're doing yoga isn't necessarily restorative. I'm talking about long hold, slow flow yoga, where you're really opening up the tendons. You're really getting the chi to disperse throughout your body evenly without pushing yourself into exhaustion. So I think this is an interesting concept. Obviously, one I personally struggle with. So interested to get a feel for what's out there. And if you do suffer with this affliction for constant high intensity exercise and you find yourself in this inability to heal and ability to grow, a lot of people know from the West what overtraining is if you've studied exercise science and physiology. But 5,000 years ago, traditional Chinese medicine already defined the balance between high energy output and restorative work, and you need to be somewhere in that balance. So just a tip for those overtraining or for those not training hard enough, don't be afraid to do it. You can get in there and train hard. Balance is key, just like with everything else. Thanks, guys. Be well.